So how come houses are so damned expensive? On the scale of 1 to the Leaning Tower of Pisa, how bad is it to miss a building report? I've been asked hundreds of questions about the building industry, hundreds of questions about infrastructure, and I'm here to answer them today. My name's John Tookey. I'm Professor of Construction Management here at AUT, and I'm here to answer your questions on infrastructure because infrastructure matters. So, first cab off the rank. Why are houses so damned expensive? We don't make houses in the same way as we make motor cars or something like this. We don't mass produce. Because we don't mass produce, we don't get the economies of scale that take place when we mass produce things, and prices generally tend to escalate as we go up. The combination of that technology issue plus the fact that land is in short supply and is not made anymore, and materials and labor are in short supply, and as a result of being a very long supply chains from overseas, as well as the fact that the labor in particular is not moving into the trades like it used to do in the old days. It means that we constantly have to recruit people from overseas in order to fill our construction jobs. This combination of circumstances just means the fact that we here in New Zealand have very expensive building industry associated with housing in particular. Tip Top Corner is always congested. Why is that? And is IKEA going to make it worse? Well, I'll answer the second part of the question first. Yes, it's going to make it a lot worse. The main reason why Tip Top Corner is always congested is to do with traffic patterns generally. We've got a combination of different patterns on the traffic systems that we have through Auckland. We've got north to south transit traffic going up State Highway 1 and to the south towards Wellington. All of this is through flowing and continuous. We've also got commuter traffic around that particular area as well, with people going and distributing themselves to the various different factory units and so on. And we've also got shoppers doing shopping things. As a result of this, you've got constant cross-flow of different traffic flows, and as a result of this, you end up with congestion. Next question from an interested listener. Why does New Zealand have such a rubbish rail system? Well, I think actually the principal thing you should be happy with is the fact that we've got any rail system whatsoever. Back in the 1870s, it was originally instigated by the Prime Minister Vogel at the time. He borrowed a bunch of money from actually from the UK to build a rail system. It was the high-speed internet access of the time. It was the killer app. Everybody had a rail system who was anything in the world. In typical Kiwi fashion, we got the best rail system that we could get for not much money, and that was the principal problem again. It was all about acquisitional costs being the principal decision-making factor. As a result of that, the decisions that were taken by Vogel and his team at that time were to select a narrow gauge rail system. Now, the narrow gauge rail system is great because it allows you to be able to have tighter turns on the rail tracks, which again allows you to be able to climb up and down the mountainous terrain that we have here in New Zealand and deal with the sort of river valleys that we have. So it made perfect sense. However, in the modern day, it means that you can't have high-speed rail. You have to replace the entirety of the rail network in order to be able to cope with high-speed rail. All of the various different intersections and crossings have to be upgraded because, again, it was set up primarily to be a system for transporting goods, as it still is. And consequently, you end up with a suboptimal rail system in the modern day. Now, in fairness, improvements have been made. However, we've got basic problems. For example, if you're dealing with shifting ISO containers around the world, these containers won't necessarily fit onto our narrow gauge system, and they won't fit through the tunnels that we have either. As a result of that, we don't have the utility in the rail system that we've got. So we're faced with a choice. We either have to rip out the whole stuff again, redo from start, which will be phenomenally expensive, or alternatively, we just make do with what we've got. As it stands at the moment, the majority of rail traffic is primarily timber, cattle, milk products that are primarily going from point of production to point of embarkation for export. In that mode, the rail system is actually fit for purpose. However, dealing with passengers, not so much. Here's an interesting question. Should I buy a house in a flood-prone area if it hasn't actually flooded before? Long story short, no. Look at the GIS map, have a look at where the 100-year weather events are and 50-year weather events, and you'll get a fair idea of the potential risk you're under. But for goodness sakes, don't set yourself up to buy a bargain, which is actually just something that's going to be a liability, because eventually these properties will not be insurable by any of the major insurance companies, and certainly not cheaply. Okay, this is actually my favorite question. I have to say this is a good question because there's some facts, figures, and numbers involved. Does Auckland really need another harbour crossing? Answer short, yes. No question. The numbers stack up. At the moment, we currently sit with a GDP of approximating 250 billion US dollars, give or take a billion. The amount of that GDP which is directly associated with Auckland is something in the region of 100 billion US dollars. So we're talking about 180 odd billion New Zealand dollars. That's huge. About 40% of our GDP is dependent on Auckland. Auckland as a city has to work. The only way in which Auckland as a city will work is with a harbour crossing. Otherwise, we're a couple of big towns either side of an inlet. That is not going to be a sustainable proposition for the future. We've got too much trade heading north-south, east-west, needs to get to harbours and ports, needs to get to its markets and all the rest of it. We need another harbour crossing, ladies and gents. No question about it. All the facts and figures are there, and the hard news is this. Every delay that we put in place just makes it more expensive to fix. And that, ladies and gents, is not an acceptable option for a country that's run on good principles. Okay, next question. On a scale of 1 to Leaning Tower of Pisa, how bad is it to skip a builder's report before buying a house? It's not a very clever idea, is the short version. With the best will in the world, it's a good idea to know as much as you possibly can about a house before you purchase it. It is worthwhile to do. You do not want to be in a situation where you've bought a lemon just because you don't know what you're looking at. And that, unfortunately, is going to be the problem. Next question. Why is housing provision so difficult? The answer is that the market does not necessarily respond quickly to supply needs. And the simple answer there, or simple issue there, is that on the one hand, money to build any housing, all construction actually, is borrowed. It has to be borrowed from somebody who wants to lend it. It has to be borrowed by multiple people, including the developer and ultimately the purchaser as well. So you have a sequence of quite slow interactions that take place. The actual build process is quite slow as well. And consequently, you end up with a slowly increasing ramping up of housing provision to match a market. Unfortunately, our various governments over various years all tend to, I'm going to say, tell fibs about the situation with regard to housing. The reason being that you can solve the problem very easily if we build a surplus of housing. However, the only people who can do that are government, because they're the only ones who have deep enough pockets to be able to create the additional surplus. However, they don't want to do that, because if they do, that means that their voters will have their houses declined in value as well. And if that happens, that's like turkeys voting for Christmas. Why does everything ever built cost more and take longer than expected? Right. The reason for this is because of expectations. Everybody tries to be optimistic. And the only way that we get sign-off for contracts is with an optimism bias. What I mean by that is, oh yeah, it'll be ready in 3 years for the City Rail Link. Or, oh yeah, it'll be $100 million to build whatever. There's an optimism bias. There are always likely escalation costs. Now, the principal reason for this is because if you're building over an extended time period, that inevitably builds in the potential for variations of currency between countries. We're buying international products, we're getting steel from overseas, whatever it may be, can all add to the cost. And what was a guaranteed maximum price all of a sudden blows out. However, it's the nature of politicians to understate the acquisition costs in order to get contracts over the line. If I told you that the harbour bridge was going to cost you $20 billion tomorrow, it's unlikely anybody would sign up for it. However, it would not be far off the actual build cost. And that's the nature of things. Last question. Absolute classic. My gas hob is on the fritz. Should I replace it with an electric one? Probably yes, because you can get some very good electric options, particularly induction type of cookery, which is very efficient, very effective, and does a really good job. And the other aspect of this, which is a longer term issue, is the fact that natural gas is on the list of greenhouse gas emissions that we're seeking to control. And therefore, in order to be compliant with the Paris Climate Accord and other aspects of the Kyoto protocols, we need to reduce consumption of this particular product, which leads us into the whole issue of cow farts and that sort of thing too. But that's a different story for a different day. My name's John Tookey. This is Infrastructure Matters.